Welcome to this lecture on the story of the Lunar Dynasty, one of the two principal royal lineages of ancient India. We will trace the journey of its rulers from their very beginnings, learning how the first king, Pururavas, transformed from a forest hermit into a universal monarch, though he lost his sanity due to love. We will discover how the ruler Nahusha temporarily claimed the throne of the heavens, but fell victim to his own pride. We will also explore why the mighty Yayati took youth away from his own son. This detailed chronicle will carry us through the centuries to the birth of Emperor Bharata and reveal how accumulated karmic debts led to the greatest split in the dynasty, dividing it into the warring clans of the Pandavas and Kauravas. The founder of the Lunar Dynasty is considered to be the first earthly ruler, Pururavas. His origins are linked to two very unusual figures, his mother Ila and his father Buddha, who in ancient texts personifies the planet Mercury. As mentioned in the lecture about the solar dynasty, the story of Ila has various interpretations in ancient sources. According to one legend, Ila was born female, but was later transformed into a male through complex rituals. Another version, described in detail in the Puranas, tells a different story. At that time, the lands were ruled by King Sudyumna. One day, during a long hunt, he became so focused on chasing a deer that he left his retinue far behind. In pursuit of the prey, the king ventured deep into a sacred forest at the foot of the mountains. There, in the shade of the trees, rested the god Shiva and his consort Parvati. According to the texts, the divine couple's solitude was disturbed by the arrival of humans. Parvati was unsettled by the presence of armed hunters. Seeing his wife's reaction, the angered Shiva cursed the forest. Any man who crossed its boundaries would immediately change sex. Unaware of the curse, King Sudyumna rode his horse into the forest and was instantly transformed into a woman, receiving the name Ila. Having lost his former life, status and army, Ila wandered for a long time along unfamiliar mountain paths. Her journey took her through rocky gorges and cold streams until she came upon a secluded ashram. My name is Michael Reynolds. You're watching Ancient Secrets. Thanks for watching my content. I'd appreciate your subscription and like. Enjoy the video. The air there was filled with the scent of incense, and the silence was broken only by the soft chanting of mantras. Buddha, the god of Mercury, known for his calmness and detachment from worldly concerns, welcomed the weary traveller. He taught her to read hymns, showed her the arrangement of the stars, and helped her find inner balance after the shock she had endured. From their union, a boy was soon born, named Pururavas. The child inherited distinctly different qualities from his parents, creating a unique balance within him. From Buddha, he received a cool, penetrating intellect of the celestial body, along with the ability for deep analysis and precise calculation. From his mother, he inherited a fiery, untamed earthly passion and intuition. From birth, Pururavas displayed exceptional physical strength and clear-mindedness, standing out among all the inhabitants of the forest settlement. While other children played simple games, he spent hours observing the movement of planets, studying the habits of wild predators, and attentively listening to the elders' discussions about the laws of the universe. He trained his body by lifting heavy stones and simultaneously strengthened his spirit through long meditations. The dual nature of Ila is a fascinating phenomenon in ancient Indian texts. In the Puranas, this story illustrates the necessity of balancing masculine and feminine principles to create a perfect ruler. A king cannot rely solely on brute strength or only gentle diplomacy. Both aspects are essential for successful governance and protection of his subjects. Modern psychology often refers to the idea of integrating opposites within a person. Experts say that suppressing one side of the personality inevitably leads to inner conflicts and a loss of wholeness. The ancient myth, through the metaphor of changing sex and divine union, shows that great achievements are possible only when a person accepts all parts of their nature. Pururavas embodied this idea, embracing both his father's logic and his mother's intuitive passion. This combination allowed him to lay the foundation for an empire that united scattered tribes. His childhood passed far from palace intrigues, in the measured life of a forest ashram. The days of the inhabitants were filled with memorizing ancient texts, gathering medicinal roots, collecting firewood for sacred fires, and observing rituals performed daily by the grey-haired elders. The life of the forest hermits was entirely subject to the rhythms of nature and the changing seasons, excluding any worldly ambitions or desire for accumulation. However, the blood of earthly rulers and celestial bodies demanded action. As he grew older, the young man began to feel confined by the forest settlement. He realized that his destiny extended far beyond morning meditations on the riverbank and the monotonous recitation of Vedic hymns beneath the trees. The role of a humble student no longer matched his inner nature, which thirsted for great deeds and practical application of his knowledge. Leaving the safe ashram, Pururavas set out for the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. In ancient Indian tradition, the attainment of true power is always closely linked with the practice of tapas, purposeful austerities aimed at accumulating inner energy. He chose the most secluded place among the cold rocks and immersed himself in years of self-discipline. The ancient Puranic texts describe this process in detail. The youth stood motionless for many months, enduring piercing cold mountain winds in winter and scorching sun rays in summer. He deliberately deprived himself of food, surviving on fallen leaves and rare drops of dew, eventually giving up even that. Pururavas concentrated his inner fire until the intensity of his austerities threatened the balance of the world. Such absolute dedication caught the attention of the highest gods. As a reward for his steadfastness, the deities granted him profound knowledge of the laws of Dharma, the universal order necessary for righteous governance. In addition, Pururavas received divine weapons and an indestructible golden chariot, capable of moving freely both on land and in the air. Folklorists interpret this image as a metaphor for absolute control over one's mind and emotions, where the chariot represents the physical body and the horses symbolize the ruler's mastered desires. Armed with new knowledge and powerful artifacts, the young man ended his period of seclusion and descended from the mountains into the fertile river valleys, ready to fulfill his duty. His return marked the beginning of active political efforts in ancient India. Pururavas began the systematic unification of scattered tribes, which until then had lived separately and often conflicted over fertile pastures, forest lands, and fresh water sources. He offered them a unified code of laws and reliable protection from external threats, relying on his unquestionable authority and the power of his divine weapons. On the sites of small camps, he laid the foundation for the magnificent city of Pratishtana, which later became the first capital of the lunar dynasty. The construction of the city was accompanied by complex ceremonies for laying the first stones, planning the layout of streets, and organizing residential quarters. According to strict ancient architectural principles, builders erected protective walls, dug deep moats, and arranged squares for public gatherings. The successful unification of vast lands allowed Pururavas to take the title of the first Chakravartin, a universal monarch whose supreme authority was recognized across all known territories. His reign was marked by strict order and unprecedented prosperity. Farmers harvested abundant crops thanks to the proper management of water resources. Trade routes became safe from bandits, and the state treasury was regularly replenished through taxes. The influence of the ruler of Pratishtana grew rapidly, soon extending far beyond the human realm. The celestial beings themselves began to seek the earthly king's military support. Whenever great conflicts erupted in the heavens with powerful adversaries, Pururavas's radiant chariot appeared at the forefront of the divine army. His carefully calculated tactics often determined the outcome of entire battles. The transition from forest hermitage to the foundation of an empire vividly illustrates an important principle of Vedic culture. The right to rule is not granted simply by birth into a royal family. Lineage opens certain opportunities, but true authority to govern others and shape their destinies requires personal effort, proven competence, and strict spiritual discipline. The future king had to personally experience hardship and solitude to learn to value the well-being of his subjects and avoid abusing his privileges. The story of the first monarch's maturation shows the long process of developing leadership qualities. Voluntarily giving up comfort to achieve a higher goal builds a strong inner core, enabling a person to bear the immense responsibility of ruling a state. Pururavas deliberately left his peaceful environment, challenged the limits of his body and mind, and returned to society in the new role of an invincible ruler. This transformation proved that the ability to govern effectively grows naturally from mastering oneself, one's fears, doubts, and human weaknesses. The reign of the new universal monarch was characterized by strict adherence to ancient traditions and continuous accumulation of wealth. Pururavas spent long hours by the sacred fire, making regular offerings to the gods. He established an administrative system based on the precise distribution of resources. His capital, Pratisthana, thrived. The treasury overflowed with gold, and granaries were always full of grain. Scholars agree that this period laid the foundations of the complex Vedic economy. In this system, proper ritual observance and the material prosperity of the people went hand in hand. People believed that the divine forces graciously accepted the king's offerings, responding with timely rains and abundant harvests. Society functioned as a unified mechanism, where every farmer, craftsman, and warrior clearly understood their place in the state's hierarchy. At the same time, a different story unfolded on the higher planes of existence, directly connected to the fate of the earthly ruler. The beautiful Apsara Urvashi, a resident of the celestial halls of Indra, had incurred the wrath of the gods. Ancient texts, including the Puranas and the Mahabharata, offer varying accounts of her exile. One version says that during a sacred dance performance, she lost her rhythm after becoming distracted by one of the assembly's attendees. Another legend claims she showed disrespect to the sage Mitra Varuni and was punished by being sent down to the human world. Deprived of her usual company of celestial musicians, she found herself in the dense, earthly forests. Urvashi retained her otherworldly nature, enchanting beauty, and independent spirit, but was now forced to wander among ordinary trees and rivers, awaiting the end of her curse. The fateful encounter happened during a royal hunt. Pururas, riding through his lands in chariots gifted by the gods, ventured deep into the forest. Suddenly, he noticed a shining figure among the trees. Seeing Urvashi, the ruler instantly lost his composure. The cool, rational mind inherited from the deity Buddhi gave way entirely to the fiery passion inherited from his mother Ela. He stopped his horses, approached the celestial maiden, and spoke to her. Pururavas told her of his power, the cities he had built, and the lands he had conquered. In a surge of emotion, he offered her to share the throne of Pratisthana as his lawful wife and queen of the entire empire. The king promised to surround her with luxury and care worthy of a goddess. Urvashi listened with a slight enigmatic smile. She fully understood the vast difference between a mortal man and a celestial being. The Apsara agreed to the proposal, but set 3 strict conditions that would forever change the course of their life together. "I will stay with you, king," she said in a cold, otherworldly tone that echoed across the forest clearing. "But you must guard my 2 celestial rams. They will always be tethered beside my bed, and you are responsible for their safety." The second condition was that he must never appear before her unclothed. The sight of the human body was unpleasant to celestial beings, and she did not wish to see his nakedness by daylight or flashes of lightning. The third was that her only food would be clarified butter. Coarse, earthly fare would defile her nature, so she would consume only what people offered to the gods. Blinded by sudden passion, Pururavas readily accepted all the conditions. The monarch, accustomed to commanding entire peoples, humbly bowed to the demands of the forest maiden. The motif of a pact with strict conditions is common in ancient mythology. It reflects the inevitable clash between human vulnerability and divine severity. In such stories, even the smallest mistake leads to disaster, regardless of the hero's intentions. Divine beings set boundaries that humans find extremely difficult to maintain over time. By entering such a union, a person takes on obligations far beyond their natural capacities. The Rig Veda describes this alliance as an attempt to unite incompatible elements of the cosmos. The earthly king tries to bind to the ground what by nature belongs to the celestial realm, thereby disturbing the cosmic balance. Relationships built on harsh, unnatural restrictions carry within them the seeds of their own destruction. People often display this pattern, trying to hold on to an idealized image of a partner. To preserve illusions of closeness, they agree to any demands, forgetting their own human nature. The ruler of Pratisthana sincerely believed his willpower would be enough to control the situation. However, he overlooked the fact that the agreement was based not on mutual trust, but on a strict ultimatum. Urvashi's choice of clarified butter as her sole nourishment emphasized her refusal to integrate into earthly life. She consumed only the purest essence, maintaining distance from mundane concerns. The prohibition against nudity symbolized the impossibility of complete openness between the spouses. The man had to conceal his true self beneath layers of fabric. Guarding the rams placed the ruler of a vast empire in the role of an ordinary night watchman, shifting his priorities. All these carefully detailed elements reveal how fragile the foundation of their union was. Pururavas voluntarily placed himself in a cage of strict rules, where breaking any meant the inevitable loss of everything he desperately tried to preserve. The alliance between the earthly king and the celestial maiden lasted 4 years. The palace in Pratisthana was filled with unearthly melodies, and gradually state affairs receded into the background for the monarch. Pururavas enjoyed Urvashi's company, ensuring all her demands were met without fail. The 2 celestial rams were always near their bed, receiving the best care. The king never parted from his clothes, not even in the most private chambers. His subjects continued to collect taxes and build new temples, yet the universal monarch had become a willing prisoner of his own bedroom. He spent his days watching his wife's dances and ensured that the servants regularly brought her fresh, clarified butter, which served as her sole nourishment. Meanwhile, discontent was growing in the heavens. The celestial musicians, known as Gandharvas, whose duty was to accompany the Apsara's dances with skillful string instrument music, had grown openly bored without their principal performer. In Vedic mythology, these beings are often guardians of the sacred Soma drink and possess profound knowledge of the universe's mysteries. Historians still debate whether they acted under direct orders from the king of the gods, who wished to reclaim the adornments of his court, or if they were motivated solely by their own longing and pride in the perfected art of the Apsara. Regardless, the Gandharvas devised a detailed plan to bring her back, fully aware of the fragile conditions of her stay on Earth and the vulnerabilities of human nature. Under the cover of a moonless night, when the entire city was deep in sleep, these celestial beings descended upon the capital of the lunar dynasty. They silently bypassed the armed guards and entered the royal chambers where Pururavas and Urvashi rested. One of the musicians approached the bed, carefully untied the first ram, and led it into the dark corridor. The frightened animal let out a loud cry that echoed through the stone vaults of the palace, breaking the night's silence. Urvashi woke instantly. Discovering her favourite companion missing, she turned sharply to her husband, with a reproach filled with otherworldly disdain and cold calculation. Had she truly entrusted her safety to a coward? Her protector slept peacefully, while night thieves brazenly robbed his home and stole her personal treasure. She found herself under the care of a man who called himself a great warrior and conqueror of tribes, but was unable to protect even a helpless animal tied to the bed. His vows had turned out to be empty words. The Apsara's words struck the ruler's pride more painfully than a poisoned arrow. Blinded by shame and the urgent need to prove his valour, Pururavas sprang from the bed. In his fury, he completely forgot his promise to conceal his body. Without even draping a simple linen cloak over himself, the naked king seized his heavy sword and dashed into the darkness in pursuit of the thieves. This was exactly what the Gandharvas had been waiting for. As soon as the ruler crossed the bedroom threshold, the celestial musicians unleashed their ancient magic. They summoned a blinding flash of lightning that tore through the night darkness for a split second. The brilliant light flooded the entire room, and Urvashi clearly saw her husband, unclothed, gripping a naked blade. The pact was irrevocably broken. The magical laws binding the Apsara to the earthly realm instantly lost their power. When Pururavas, unable to catch the nimble thieves, returned to the bedroom with his sword lowered, he found only an empty bed. Urvashi had vanished into the night air, leaving no trace or farewell. In the hymns of the Rig Veda, this story emphasizes the inevitability of fate and the unyielding strictness of cosmic order. Higher powers always find a way to restore balance and return their elements to their rightful places. The myth illustrates that the bond between mortals and immortals is a temporary anomaly, one that the universe corrects in time. The celestial must return to the heavens, and the earthly must remain on earth, governed by the laws of time. The illusion of control is a common trap for a person endowed with great power. The ruler of the city sincerely believed he could command a divine being solely through his will and discipline. He established a complex system of rules to keep Urvashi by his side, but external circumstances easily exposed his hidden vulnerability. The Gandharvas did not use brute force. They simply created a specific situation where the king's human nature, his wounded pride, intolerance of criticism, and impulsiveness worked against him. This episode vividly demonstrates how fragile alliances based on delicate agreements can shatter at the first serious encounter with an unforeseen crisis. Pururavas lost his love not because of malice or betrayal, but due to a natural human reaction to a direct insult. His downfall was the result of subtle manipulation that exploited his own weaknesses. The detailed account of this tragedy makes the ancient story an accurate reflection of the mechanisms governing human behavior across all eras, reminding us that loss always begins with an internal mistake. Left alone in the empty palace, Pururavas could not bear the weight of his loss. The splendor of the city he had built over many years lost all meaning to him. The ruler entrusted state affairs to his trusted advisors, removed his heavy royal ornaments, and left the city walls behind. A long period of wandering began. His mind clouded by grief, he roamed dense forests, forgetting his high status, surviving on roots and wild berries. Ancient hymns describe how, maddened by separation, Pururavas appealed to towering trees, swift rivers and forest birds, asking them to show him the way to his beloved. Nature remained silent, but the king pressed on through valleys and mountain passes, his feet bleeding, burning away the last remnants of his human pride. His subjects sent search parties across the continent, but Pururavas deliberately moved further from inhabited areas, immersing himself in the wild, reflecting his inner turmoil. Months of searching brought the exhausted traveller to a lake on the vast Kurukshetra plain. Its waters were famed for their purity and often attracted celestial beings for rest. There, among blooming lotuses, Pururavas spotted a group of playing apsaras. They had taken the form of graceful waterfowl, gliding smoothly across the lake's surface. The king's heart trembled when he recognized Urvashi unmistakably among them. He rushed to the marshy shore, reaching out to the cold water. "Return to me," the king begged in a trembling voice filled with despair. "My body is worn from long wandering and ready to become prey for wild wolves if you reject me. Without your presence, my life is meaningless, and my kingdom is but an empty land." The apsaras came ashore, revealing their true, radiant forms. Urvashi looked at her former husband without the tenderness that once bound them in the palace. Her answer was cold and resolute. "Go away, Pururavas," she said evenly. "My heart is now like that of a wild hyena. It knows no human mercy. There is no lasting friendship between mortals and gods. Return to your lands and rule your people, for our time has passed forever, and the laws of the heavens allow no exceptions." These words shattered the king's last hopes. He fell to the damp earth, unable to continue fighting for his love. The celestial musicians, the Gandharvas who had caused his downfall, watched the scene closely. Seeing the depth of human suffering and the sincerity of his feelings, they took pity on the fallen ruler. They approached him and handed over a censer burning with sacred fire. They explained that the path to the heavens was not closed forever, but crossing the boundary between worlds required a complete transformation of his nature. With this gift, Pururavas withdrew into the forest. He began performing complex multi-day rituals methodically purifying his spirit from earthly attachments and passions. The king learned to create fire by rubbing together 2 pieces of Arani wood, a discovery that became a vital ritual practice for future generations. Gradually, through strict discipline and continuous chanting of mantras, the ruler's human body began to lose its physical density. By purifying his karma through ascetic practices and the sacred fire's heat, Pururavas transformed his earthly form and was reborn as a Gandharva, earning the rightful passage to the heavens and reunion with Urvashi in an immortal state. This transition from human suffering to spiritual elevation through ritual holds deep symbolic meaning within Vedic culture. The Rig Veda recounts this story in detail, describing the origin of the sacred fire, known as Agni, within the traditions of the lunar dynasty. This fire became the essential link between the human and divine realms, a universal tool that allowed material offerings to be transformed into subtle energy and conveyed to higher powers. Some scholars believe the myth of Pururavas reflects a real historical phase when ancient tribes moved toward more complex religious practices, with fire as the central element uniting scattered communities. The ruler did more than reclaim his lost love. He brought humanity practical knowledge of how to interact with the unseen world. Moreover, the story illustrates the psychological process of building resilience through profound life crises. The ancient text reveals a journey of complete loss of familiar external supports and reaching the brink of despair. Pururavas lost his kingdom, status, family, and even his sanity. Yet, at the point of greatest vulnerability, when old ways of managing reality ceased to work, his inner transformation began. The fire bestowed by the Gandharvas symbolizes the spark of awareness that enables a person to transmute pain into creative spiritual power. Passing through the crucible of purification, the king elevated his existence to a new level, proving that true transcendence is only possible after fully letting go of past illusions. The earthly lineage of rulers continued through Prince Ayu, the eldest son born of the union between the earthly monarch and the celestial nymph. Taking up the reins of power, the new king faced a state weakened by a long absence of firm leadership. Prolonged lack of a supreme ruler had loosened administrative ties among provinces, and many local governors began acting independently, keeping portions of tax revenues for themselves. Ayu chose a political path sharply different from his predecessors. He rejected destructive extremes, focusing resources on strengthening the state internally, restoring order, and revitalizing the economy. His years on the throne marked an era of steady, methodical work. The king personally inspected border territories, checking the reliability of fortifications and securing safe trade routes with neighbouring peoples. The court's attention shifted from mystical pursuits to practical concerns of survival and prosperity. Under his orders, engineers built new irrigation canals, allowing farmers to expand arable land and harvest 2 crops per season. Spacious granaries were constructed in cities. Peasants received support from royal reserves during poor harvests, and the tax system gained a transparent structure. Ayu regularly convened councils of wise advisors to refine the legal code. He insisted that judicial decisions be based on dharma rather than the personal preferences of governors. Palace records from this period are filled with entries about collected grain, constructed roads, and resolved land disputes. Translations of Sanskrit sources note a clear pattern in the development of great dynasties, where a generation of chaos is often followed by one of consolidation. This cycle reflects the natural mechanism of human society's self-preservation. An age of passions exhausts a kingdom's resources, disrupts the established way of life, and demands a subsequent period of calm to rebuild strength. Ayu fulfilled this historical role flawlessly. He avoided military conflicts, preferring to resolve disputes through diplomacy and marriage alliances. His reign laid a solid material and legal foundation upon which a more ambitious future generation of rulers could build. The fruit of this stable era was his son, named Nahusha. From an early age, the boy was raised in an environment of strict court etiquette and measured daily rhythm. Yet within him grew a very different potential, one that demanded expression. Nahusha showed exceptional aptitude for learning. Under the guidance of experienced Brahmins, he effortlessly absorbed complex Vedic texts, studied grammar, astronomy, and treatises on governance. His mentors noted his sharp intellect and phenomenal memory. The prince could recite philosophical debates verbatim after hearing them only once. Beyond intellectual pursuits, the young man displayed remarkable physical endurance. He spent hours training with weapons in the palace courtyards, mastering archery, swordsmanship, and chariot driving. Nahusha practiced until his movements became automatic, repeating the same exercises thousands of times. As he matured, Nahusha developed an inclination toward asceticism, which puzzled many courtiers. Unlike his noble peers, he avoided noisy feasts, hunting for sport, and idle chatter. The prince often left the capital to retreat in remote forest hermitages, where he practiced extended meditation and strict fasting. He consciously limited his needs for food and sleep, subjecting his body to the control of the mind. This discipline shaped the character of a future leader capable of making unpopular decisions and bearing the heavy responsibility for the fate of thousands. Asceticism became his tool for cleansing the mind of unnecessary attachments. His psychological portrait is inseparable from the burden of a great legacy. The boy grew up in the shadow of his grandfather's legend, whose name was invoked in every hymn and folktale. The story of the ruler who founded an empire, won the heart of the celestial nymph Urvashi, and ultimately joined the assembly of divine beings exerted a subtle pressure on the young prince. Nahusha felt a constant need to prove his right to belong to such an illustrious line. This drove him to pursue absolute perfection in all endeavours. He allowed himself no mistakes, shaping his life as an unbroken series of tests of endurance. His father watched the son's development with calm approval. Ayu understood that the prosperous state he had built would soon require a ruler of a different magnitude. The peaceful era was drawing to a close, and new challenges loomed on the borders of the known world. Challenges demanding the intervention of a person with an unyielding will. Nahusha gradually took on state responsibilities. He led military campaigns against mountain tribes that periodically threatened trade caravans, always returning victorious and restoring safety to the roads. The prince's authority among warriors and common people grew steadily. They saw in him the embodiment of the ideal monarch, combining the wisdom of a scholar with the practical decisiveness of a commander. Nahusha prepared to ascend the throne, unaware that fate had prepared trials of power for him beyond the earthly realm. At the same time, a profound crisis was unfolding in the heavens, threatening the established cosmic order. The king of gods, Indra, had committed a grave transgression and was compelled to withdraw for an extended period to purify his karma. This episode, though discussed in detail elsewhere, is inseparable from the story of the lunar dynasty's development and cannot be overlooked. The celestial throne stood empty, yet the vast universe required constant guidance from a ruler capable of directing the movements of the stars, distributing the rains, and maintaining the balance of forces across different realms. The divine beings gathered in council, seeking a solution to this pressing dilemma. Their attention turned to Earth, where they observed the impeccable life of King Nahusha. His reign was marked by justice, and his personal discipline commanded respect even among the highest powers. The celestial beings descended to the earthly capital and offered Nahusha the opportunity to temporarily assume the heavenly throne until Indra completed his penance and returned to his duties. Nahusha accepted and ascended to the celestial halls of Amaravati. Granted absolute authority over the universe, the earthly king began to change rapidly. Accustomed to constant self-control in the limitations of the material world, he now found himself in a realm where any desire was instantly fulfilled. The piety Nahusha had cultivated over decades through rigorous austerities and daily governance began to dissolve in an atmosphere of complete indulgence. Lavish palaces, the music of celestial performers, and the absence of earthly concerns dulled his vigilance. He quickly adapted to his new role and began to demand all the privileges due to a true Indra. Among these, he claimed the right to the wife of the legitimate ruler of the heavens, the goddess Shakti. Ancient texts describe how Nahusha sent emissaries to the goddess, demanding she share her bed with him immediately. "I bear the title of King of the Gods," Nahusha arrogantly declared to his new advisors. "Therefore, The wife of the former ruler belongs to me by right, along with all the treasures of these palaces. Shachi found herself in a difficult position. A direct refusal could provoke the wrath of the powerful temporary ruler, leading to disastrous consequences for the entire celestial kingdom. She sought counsel from the divine mentor Brihaspati, who advised her to use cunning. Shachi sent Nahusha a message stating she would accept him on one condition. The earthly king must arrive at her palace carried in a palanquin, but not by ordinary servants, instead by the great sages. Blinded by desire and intoxicated by his own importance, Nahusha failed to see the trap. He ordered the most revered Brahmins to be gathered and compelled them to carry his palanquin. As ancient Vedic texts recount, these sages, devoted to meditation and the study of sacred scriptures, were unaccustomed to heavy physical labor. They moved slowly, struggling to maintain balance on the celestial paths beneath the weight of the gold-adorned palanquin. Nahusha, burning with impatience to see Shachi, grew irritated. He believed the bearers were deliberately delaying, ignoring his commands. When the procession slowed again, the king lost his remaining composure. Leaning out of the palanquin, he struck one of the great sages with his foot, ordering him to move faster. At that moment, time seemed to freeze. The physical insult to a spiritual authority crossed a boundary beyond which there was no return. The sage Agastya stopped, set the palanquin down, and looked at the ruler with blazing eyes. "Your pride has clouded your mind," Agastya said in anger. "Fall from the heavens. You will be transformed into a giant serpent and crawl in the dust of the earth for many millennia until you atone for your wrongdoing." The curse took effect immediately. Nahusha lost his divine form, his power vanished, and he fell, becoming a massive serpent. This story serves as a classic example of how power can corrupt the human psyche. Virtue, nurtured under the strict limitations of earthly life, could not withstand the test of absolute freedom. Nahusha's greatest misstep was not his desire for another's spouse, but the direct physical offense against a bearer of spiritual knowledge. In the Mahabharata, this episode is presented as a clear warning to future rulers. Holding high office without understanding internal moral boundaries inevitably leads to disaster. The parallels with modern leadership are unmistakable. Often, reaching the heights of a career is accompanied by a loss of connection with reality. The concept of arrogance, thoroughly described in ancient Indian philosophy, marks a clear point of no return. When a person decides they are above the laws of respect and basic ethics, their rapid downfall begins. Nahusha surpassed all earthly kings in piety, but failed to control his own ego once at the pinnacle of power. His transformation into a serpent symbolizes the loss of higher human qualities and a regression to basic animal instincts. The lunar dynasty lost one of its most promising members, and the earthly throne passed to his son, who was tasked with restoring the family's reputation. This successor was Yayati. From the very beginning of his reign, Yayati demonstrated loyalty to his ancestors' traditions and great physical strength. The young ruler understood the weight of his inheritance. After his father's fall, he needed to rebuild the trust of his subjects and strengthen the authority of the royal power. Yayati personally travelled the borders of his realm, inspecting the readiness of the garrisons and the condition of trade routes. His court in the capital was known for strict adherence to rituals, and the king quickly gained a reputation as a just judge, to whom petitioners came from all corners of the country. The Mahabharata notes that under his leadership, the lands flourished, harvests were gathered on time, and the subjects felt secure, forgetting recent upheavals. Meanwhile, far beyond the human kingdoms, in hidden forest retreats, events were unfolding that would forever change the course of the lunar dynasty's history. A powerful tribe of Asuras, rivals of the gods in the struggle for world dominance, was under the spiritual guidance of the mentor, Shukra. This Brahmin possessed secret knowledge of a mantra capable of restoring fallen warriors to life. Such power made him untouchable even by kings. Shukra had one daughter named Devayani. She grew up in an atmosphere of indulgence and deep reverence from those around her, accustomed from an early age to receiving whatever she desired at once. One day, Devayani went for a walk in the forest with Princess Sharmishta, daughter of the Asura king, accompanied by a retinue of attendants. The girls wandered among the trees until they reached a lake with crystal clear water. Weary from the summer heat, they left their clothes on the shore and waded into the water to refresh themselves. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and a gusty wind scattered and mixed their garments. Coming ashore, Sharmishta hurriedly put on Devayani's dress by mistake. This act enraged the mentor's daughter. Devayani loudly reproached the princess, reminding her that the Asura king was merely a student of her father. According to Devayani, Sharmishta held a lower social rank and had no right to touch her personal belongings. Devayani's words wounded the princess's pride. Sharmishta, whose veins carried royal blood, refused to tolerate such insults from the Brahmin's daughter. A heated argument quickly escalated into a physical scuffle. In a fit of anger, Sharmishta pushed Devayani hard. The mentor's daughter lost her balance and fell into a deep, dry well, the bottom overgrown with thorny bushes. Believing her adversary would no longer trouble her, Sharmishta calmly gathered her retinue and returned to the palace, leaving Devayani alone in the pit for several days. On that very day, King Yayati was hunting a deer in the same forest. The long chase had exhausted the ruler, and his horse needed rest. Searching nearby for a water source, he pushed through the undergrowth and heard faint cries for help. Yayati dismounted, approached the edge of the well, and looked down. At the very bottom, he saw a young woman whose clothes were torn on the edges, and her face was covered in dust. The king did not waste time with questions. Extending his right hand downward, he grasped the frightened girl's palm and with a smooth motion lifted her to the surface. The young woman immediately composed herself, dusted off her clothes, and looked carefully at her rescuer. Recognizing the warrior as the ruler of the Lunar Dynasty, she did not falter. Standing upright, she spoke in a calm voice. Quote 0. The king found himself in a difficult position. Marriage between a mortal ruler and the daughter of a spiritual guide of the Asuras was uncommon. Such a union violated established customs and required the consent of Shukra himself. The king politely replied that he could not make such an important decision without her father's blessing. He bowed respectfully to the young woman and left the forest, returning to his capital to contemplate the situation. From the perspective of modern studies of ancient Indian culture, this episode from the epic reveals the mechanisms of forming social and political bonds in Vedic society. The intertwining of fates between representatives of different races through marriage held political significance. The union of an earthly king with the daughter of the Asura mentor created a diplomatic precedent, joining forces that had previously existed separately and often in conflict. The ancient text shows how seemingly ordinary events often lay the foundation for strong alliances that change the course of history. A routine forest hunt and a simple quarrel between two young women by a well led to a union that shaped the direction of the Lunar Dynasty for generations. A personal conflict over a mix-up with clothing set in motion an irreversible chain of events, culminating in the merging of powerful families and the birth of new heirs to the throne. This story also highlights the importance of physical contact in Vedic culture. Touching the right hand was not merely an act of assistance, but a sacred gesture sealing an unbreakable bond between man and woman. Refusal to honor such a commitment carried karmic consequences, making the king's choice an inevitable step on his path to fulfilling his royal duty. Soon after, the king officially married Devayani, having received her father Shukra's consent. The wedding ceremony included the recitation of Vedic hymns and offerings to the sacred fire of Agni. This ritual firmly established the alliance between the earthly ruler and the daughter of the Asura mentor. As part of the agreement made after the quarrel at the well, the princess Sharmishta faced punishment for her actions. She lost her status and became a servant to Devayani. Along with 1,000 other attendants, the former daughter of the Asura king left her homeland. She travelled to the king's palace, accompanying her new mistress on the long journey to the capital. Upon arrival, life at the residence settled into a steady rhythm. Devayani enjoyed the position of the ruler's lawful wife, managing servants, participating in court ceremonies, and receiving valuable gifts from vassals. Sharmishta lived separately in the spacious gardens, in an area called Ashokavati, the grove of Ashoka trees, where the women of the royal court usually rested. Outwardly, the former princess accepted her fate. She diligently fulfilled her duties as a servant, offering water, attending to her mistress's garments, and concealing her feelings behind a mask of submission. Several years passed. Devayani bore the king's sons, strengthening her position in the dynasty and securing heirs for the realm. Meanwhile, Sharmishta watched her mistress's prosperity with sadness. According to the laws of the time, a woman who did not bear children could not fully fulfill her duty. Bearing offspring was considered the primary contribution to maintaining cosmic order and continuing ancestral lineage. A woman without sons lost societal respect and support in old age. One spring day, the king strolled through the palace gardens, enjoying the coolness of the pond surrounded by blooming lotuses. Seizing a moment when the guards had stepped back respectfully, Sharmishta approached the ruler secretly. She bowed respectfully and said, "Ruler, your duty is to never refuse those who seek help. Grant me a child so that I may fulfill my purpose and find peace. I am under your protection, and only you can give me a future in this world." The king found himself in a dilemma. On one hand, during the wedding ceremony, the sage Shukra had forbidden him from forming a close bond with Sharmishta, warning of serious consequences. The Brahmin's word held absolute authority, and breaking this prohibition risked a curse. On the other hand, Vedic law explicitly required the monarch to protect all subjects and fulfill the requests of those who sought his care. Refusing a woman's plea to continue her lineage was considered a violation of the ruler's duty. According to the scriptures, the king bore responsibility for the well-being of every resident of his kingdom, listening even to the humblest petitioner. After much reflection, the king, mindful of his duty, agreed to her request. Their secret union lasted for a long time, unnoticed by the palace residents. As a result, Sharmishta bore the king 3 sons. She raised them away from prying eyes in her secluded home among the garden trees, protecting them from the queen's wrath. The secret remained undiscovered until Devayani accidentally wandered into that part of the garden. Walking along the paths, she saw 3 boys playing on the grass. The children bore a royal resemblance. Their posture and features reminded her of the king himself. Devayani called them over gently and asked who their father was, expecting to hear the name of a gardener or a guard. Without hesitation, the boys pointed to the ruler. At that moment, Sharmishta emerged from the house. Devayani did not understand everything. Overcome with anger, feeling betrayed and humiliated, she refused to hear her husband's explanations, who tried to justify his actions by invoking his royal duty. That very day, Devayani ordered a chariot to be prepared, left the palace, and returned to her father's abode, the sage Shukra. In tears, she recounted the king's behaviour, demanding justice and punishment for the one who had broken his vow. This episode from the epic deeply explores the internal conflict between different kinds of duty. The ruler found himself caught between loyalty to his wife, the oath made to her father, and the monarch's obligation to fulfill his subjects' requests. Ancient texts reveal that fulfilling one law often leads to breaking another. The king chose the path of the monarch, placing the duty to protect those who seek help above family obligations. However, in the Vedic tradition, every decision comes with a price. The complexity of human relationships is always accompanied by pride, jealousy, and struggles for status. The ancient text shows that secret agreements inevitably lead to friction, even in the strongest unions. The illusion that balance can be maintained by hiding the truth and crossing established boundaries often causes the downfall of families. There is an interesting theory about Sharmishta's behaviour. Some scholars believe her request for a child was motivated not only by religious duty, but also by political calculation. By bearing the king's sons, the former Asura princess restored her lost status and secured her family's place in the lunar dynasty's line of succession. Thus, personal resentment over humiliation intertwined closely with dynastic interests, laying the groundwork for future conflicts among the ruler's descendants. Upon learning of the events, the Asura mentor Shukra immediately summoned the king to account. For the Brahmin, breaking the oath made during the marriage ceremony before the sacred fire of Agni was an offence demanding retribution. Yayati left the capital and journeyed to the forest hermitage of the sage, fully aware of the gravity of his situation. The path through the dense thickets felt long to the ruler, and the silence of the ashram only heightened his anxiety. Drawing from the ancient Indian epics, the king sought to justify his actions by appealing to the laws of Dharma, which obligate a monarch to protect those who ask and grant their wishes. He argued that denying a woman who requested the continuation of the lineage would bring him dishonor. Yet, Shukra remained unmoved by these pleas. In Shukra's eyes, Yayati had crossed the line that separates a king from a man who indulges his own weaknesses. The anger of the Asura mentor held a power capable of altering the fate of rulers. Rising from his seat, his face contorted with indignation, Shukra pronounced a curse that would forever change the course of the lunar dynasty's history. In an instant, Yayati's body began to transform. The curse took effect immediately. His muscles, once strong enough to wield a bow, drive a chariot and tame horses, withered and lost their resilience. His posture bent under the weight of suddenly imposed years. His skin became a network of wrinkles, and his hair turned ashen and began to fall out. Yayati was struck by premature, frail old age. His vision blurred, hearing dulled, and his joints ached, making every movement difficult. The king, at the peak of his reign and enjoying the pleasures of palace life, was suddenly reduced to a feeble elder. This transformation happened so swiftly that his mind refused to accept the new reality. Hands once steady in holding the royal scepter now trembled with strain. His regal robes hung loosely on his emaciated frame, emphasizing the extent of the catastrophe. Overwhelmed by fear, Yayati fell to his knees before the wrathful sage. Physical frailty stripped him of pride and confidence. "Have mercy," he pleaded with a trembling voice. "My thirst for life and the joys of this world is not yet quenched. I have not yet savoured the fruits of my reign, the taste of food, or the company of my wives. Grant me time to complete my earthly affairs." The king's words were filled with the despair of one losing what he held most dear. Watching the fallen ruler's suffering, Shukra's anger softened somewhat. The Brahmin's wrath gave way to justice. "The curse I have pronounced cannot be undone," the mentor said calmly. "The laws of the universe are unchangeable, and every action carries consequences. But you may transfer your old age to any of your sons, if one willingly agrees to give you his youth. The one who accepts your frailty will pass his life force to you." This condition offered Yayati a chance at salvation, yet it also confronted him with a difficult choice that required him to overcome paternal feelings. In the Puranas and Mahabharata, the body is seen as a temporary vessel, a tool for traversing the earthly path. Old age, in this context, is not merely biological decline, but a forced separation from worldly desires. According to Vedic tradition, life is divided into strict stages called ashramas. The final period is intended for retreat into the forest, renunciation of material attachments, and preparation for transition to another state of being. By imposing the curse, Shukra essentially tried to force Yayati onto the next stage of spiritual development, depriving him of the ability to rule and indulge in pleasures. However, the king's mind was utterly unprepared for such a transformation. Yayati clung to the material world, displaying an unwillingness to let go of the illusions of youth. He refused to accept the natural flow of time and sought ways to circumvent divine law. This mythological episode explores the human fear of aging. The fear of growing old breeds fantasies about extending youth by any means, causing one to forget moral boundaries. The story of King Yayati raises the question of the cost a person is willing to pay to preserve physical strength. Shukra's proposal shifts the focus from punishment to a test of parental ego. Is a father willing to sacrifice his child's future to satisfy his own ambitions and prolong his own pleasures? In the texts, this motif serves as an indicator revealing the true priorities of a ruler. The requirement for voluntary sacrifice by the sons complicates the matter, turning it from a magical exchange into a test of family bonds and filial duty. Yayati had lost control over his own body, and now the fate of the monarch rested entirely in the hands of his descendants, whose decisions would determine the stability of the entire kingdom. This episode is a crucial key to understanding the mechanisms of power transfer and karmic responsibility within the dynasty. A ruler unable to master his desires sets in motion a chain of events that will divide his lineage for many generations to come. Seeking salvation, Yayati turned to his elder sons. In the spacious palace hall, leaning on his staff, the weakened king slowly approached his eldest son, Yadu. The king sighed deeply, looking into his heir's eyes and said, "My son, take my old age for a time. Let me enjoy life. My desires have not yet faded, but my body refuses to serve. I want to taste wine again, hear music, and feel strength in my hands." Yadu looked carefully at his father's bent figure. The eldest son fully understood the weight of such a request. Life in a frail body imposed many restrictions, depriving a person of the ability to participate in state affairs, hunt in the forests, or enjoy the pleasures of existence. Life in such a body lacks joy. "I will not give up my youth," Yadu answered firmly, stepping back. "Your time has passed, and each must bear their own burden without shifting it onto their descendants." The eldest son's refusal sparked the king's wrath. Expecting unquestioning obedience, Yayati perceived these words as betrayal. In a burst of anger, he cursed Yadu, forever depriving him and all his future descendants of the right to inherit the throne. From this rejected son would emerge a great lineage, but traditionally, it is believed this moment laid the foundation for the complex political map of ancient India, where the descendants of the eldest brother were excluded from supreme power and forced to seek their own path. Rejected by his firstborn, the king turned in turn to his other sons, Turvasu, Druhyu, and Anu. Each found reasons to refuse. One cited the weakness of old age, another spoke of inability to manage the chariot and wield weapons, and the third pointed to loss of attractiveness and respect among subjects. All received similar curses from their angry father. Their descendants became founders of various tribes, inhabiting distant regions of the continent and forever losing the right to the throne in the central lands. Finally, the king approached his youngest son, Puru. The young man bowed respectfully to his father, without waiting for a request. "O king," Puru said calmly, "I am ready to fulfill your will. Take my youth and enjoy the world as long as you wish. I will bear your wrinkles and accept your frailty, for a son's duty is to serve his parents." The mystical exchange was completed. Yayati's body instantly regained strength, his back straightened, and his skin regained its former resilience. Puru had become a frail elder, but his spirit remained completely calm. Restored to youth, Yayati returned to ruling the kingdom and to worldly pleasures. The texts describe his reign continuing for another 1,000 years. He enjoyed all available blessings, hosted lavish receptions, expanded the kingdom's borders, and spent time in gardens. Yet, after centuries, the king began to realize the futility of his attempts to quench his inner thirst. In the Mahabharata, this moment is depicted through the ruler's reflection on the nature of human desire. Yayati came to understand that passion is like fire. The more fuel is added to the fire, the stronger it burns, threatening to consume everything around it. Desire can never be fully satisfied. It can only be overcome through inner calm and a conscious renunciation of material attachments. Having realized this truth, the king summoned Puru. Jayati restored his rightful youth to his younger son and took back his own old age, now accepting it with gratitude and humility. In recognition of Puru's devotion and willingness to sacrifice himself for his father, Jayati declared him his sole heir and entrusted him with supreme authority over the entire kingdom. The former monarch left the capital and retreated to the forest to undertake ascetic practices and spiritual disciplines. This episode marks a crucial division in the lunar dynasty into two main branches, the Yadavas and the Pauravas. Their historical paths would diverge for many centuries, only to cross again during the great events of the Mahabharata. The Yadava line, deprived of the imperial throne, would develop as a confederation of independent tribes, while Puru's descendants continued to rule the central regions, shaping the classical model of Vedic statehood. The younger son's act exemplifies the concept of supreme self-sacrifice. In ancient culture, subordinating personal ambitions to family interests was rewarded by the transfer of ultimate power. Puru disrupted the usual order of succession, where the throne rightfully belonged only to the eldest. His choice proves that the true foundation for governing a state is not birthright, but the capacity for complete self-denial. A ruler must be able to place duty above personal comfort. By accepting his father's physical hardships, Puru demonstrated his readiness to bear responsibility for the entire empire. At the same time, Jayati's story marks the end of a long cycle of exploring the material world. A millennium of indulgence led the king to understand the limitations of physical existence. The return of old age symbolizes the restoration of the natural order, disrupted by magic and human egoism. The transfer of power from the enlightened father to the devoted son restores harmony in the kingdom, ensuring a stable future for the dynasty. Many generations later, a direct descendant of Puru, King Dushyanta, appears on the historical stage. His reign is described in the Mahabharata as a period of prosperity and territorial expansion for the Paurava state. The king often left the capital to go hunting. In ancient India, hunting was not merely a pastime for the nobility, but an important royal duty. It allowed the ruler to monitor the empire's distant borders, protect farming settlements from wild animals, and maintain the army's combat skills during peacetime. The king's outings were accompanied by a large retinue, including experienced warriors, beaters, and charioteers. According to ancient legends, during one such extended expedition, Dushyanta became captivated by the chase of an exceptionally swift deer. The animal led the king's chariot ever deeper into dense forest, far from the main camp. The pursuit lasted several hours. The trees grew taller, the underbrush thicker, until the forest suddenly opened up, revealing the calm banks of the Malini River. There stood the hermitage of the respected sage Kanva. The air here was filled with the smoke of sacrificial fires, and forest predators rested peacefully in the shade alongside herbivores. Any display of aggression was strictly forbidden within this spiritual sanctuary, so Dushyanta stopped his horses. Leaving his bow, arrows, and royal insignia at the entrance, the king entered the sacred grove as a humble pilgrim. At that time, sage Kanva was away, having travelled to perform rituals in distant holy places. The guest was greeted by a young woman named Shakuntala. She was the sage's adopted daughter, born under extraordinary circumstances. Her biological parents were the sage Vishvamitra and the celestial nymph Menaka. Menaka left the infant on the riverbank immediately after birth and returned to the realm of the gods. The birds of Shakuntala sheltered the abandoned child with their wings from the scorching sun and predators until Kanva found her by chance. He took her to his hermitage, named her after the birds that saved her, and raised her as his own daughter. Growing up far from bustling cities, Shakuntala was unfamiliar with court etiquette and the complexities of political life. Her daily duties involved watering young trees, gathering flowers for worship ceremonies, and caring for forest animals. She offered the weary king fresh water and fruit, flawlessly fulfilling the traditional duty of hospitality. Dushyanta observed her attentively and inquired about her origins. Learning her birth story from Vishvamitra, the king realized that she carried the blood of the warrior class and thus had every right to become his lawful wife. Unwilling to wait for her adoptive father's return from pilgrimage, the king proposed they unite immediately. In Vedic legal tradition, there were 8 recognized forms of marriage. One of them was the Gandharva rite, which required only the mutual consent of the man and woman. It did not need the presence of Brahmin priests, the chanting of sacred mantras, the lighting of ritual fire, or the approval of senior relatives. Shakuntala hesitated for some time, fearing she might break her vow of obedience to Kanva, but the king's persistence and her own sudden affection overcame her caution. They spent several days together in complete forest silence. However, the king's duties demanded his swift return to the capital. State affairs, military command, and judicial responsibilities did not allow Dushyanta to remain away from his throne for long. Before leaving, he spoke to his wife to affirm their agreement. "I will come back for you," Dushyanta declared confidently. "I will bring you to the capital, and our son will inherit my throne." With these words, he left the hermitage, leaving Shakuntala to await his return amid the familiar natural surroundings. The contrast between the strict rules of the royal court and the free life of the forest hermitage highlights the difference between social institutions and the natural order. The palace in Hastinapura represents a complex hierarchy where every step is governed by centuries-old tradition and relationships are built on political advantage. The forest refuge, on the other hand, is a space of sincerity and equality, where a person's status is determined by spiritual practice rather than noble ancestry. The union of the monarch and the hermit's daughter bridges these two disparate worlds. It unites state power with natural purity, creating the essential foundation for the birth of a future emperor. At the same time, this story deeply explores the conflict between personal commitments and public recognition. The Gandharva rite held full legal validity within ancient law, but the fact of its performance remained invisible to society. The state apparatus always demands tangible proof, the presence of authoritative witnesses and public ceremonies to confirm a couple's status. Secret unions inevitably jeopardize the stable future of both parties, as they lack external legal protection. Human society does not recognize agreements made away from public view, no matter how sincere they may be. The promise Dushyanta made in the solitude of the forest would soon confront the realities of state governance, where words require documented evidence, and even the memory of the monarch faces unforeseen challenges. As he left the hermitage, Dushyanta gave his wife a heavy gold ring engraved with the royal emblem. This ornament served as a guarantee of his promise and a pass to the ruler's palace. After the king's departure, Shakuntala sank into sorrow, spending her days reflecting on their future meeting and scarcely noticing the world around her. During this time, a powerful sage named Durvasa, known for his fiery temper and strict adherence to rituals, visited the quiet ashram. The young woman, lost in thoughts of her husband, sat near the entrance of the hut. She did not notice the arrival of the guest, nor did she offer him water for washing his feet or pay him the proper respects. In Vedic culture, such behaviour was considered a serious breach of hospitality. Offended, Durvasa became enraged and pronounced a curse. The one she constantly thought of would forever erase her from his memory. Upon hearing this, Shakuntala's friends were horrified and begged the sage to forgive the unintentional mistake. Seeing their remorse, Durvasa softened his decree, adding an important condition. The ruler's memory of her would return only when he saw a tangible token of his promise. Several months later, Shakuntala, accompanied by the sage Kanva's disciples, journeyed to the capital to claim her rightful place beside her husband. The path led through dense forests and bodies of water. While bathing in a river, the royal ring slipped unnoticed from her finger and vanished into the dark waters. Arriving at the palace, she approached the ruler with hope, expecting a joyful reunion. However, Durvasa's curse was in full effect. Dushyanta looked at her with a cold, detached gaze. He did not remember the forest hermitage, their vows, or their secret marriage. "I do not know you, woman," he said in a steady, indifferent voice. "My duty is to listen carefully to every subject who comes seeking help, but I have never made promises to you, nor entered into any union." Shakuntala tried to present the ring as proof, only to find it missing. Without evidence, she left Hastinapura. She did not succumb to despair, but retreated to a remote forest, where she soon gave birth to a son named Bharata. Texts mention that from an early age, the boy displayed remarkable strength, agility, and a complete lack of fear toward the world around him. He grew up surrounded by wild nature, unfamiliar with palace luxury, court etiquette, or political intrigues. His daily companions were forest predators. He tamed tigers and lions with ease, playing with them like ordinary pets, unafraid of their claws. Shakuntala raised the future ruler herself, imparting knowledge of dharma, justice, and the cosmic order. Her unwavering resilience demonstrates the profound inner strength of the feminine principle in this ancient epic. She neither sought protection from other kings, nor asked for help from relatives, nor did she attempt revenge on Dushyanta, relying solely on her own spiritual resources. Meanwhile, unexpected events unfolded in the capital. A simple fisherman cast his nets into the river and caught an unusually large fish. While preparing the catch at the city market, he found a golden ring with the imperial seal inside the fish's stomach. Guards immediately arrested the fisherman, accusing him of stealing state property, and brought him to the palace for trial. When Dushyanta held the recovered ring, Durvasa's curse instantly lifted. Memories of the forest hermitage, the beautiful woman, their secret marriage, and his abandoned wife flooded his mind. The ruler was overwhelmed with guilt for publicly rejecting his lawful wife and labeling her a liar before the entire court. Dushyanta immediately organized a search and personally ventured into the forest. After a long time exploring the remote areas, he came upon a spacious clearing where an extraordinary scene unfolded. A small boy confidently held the mane of a massive lion and insisted the beast open its mouth so he could count its teeth. The amazed ruler approached the fearless child, feeling a deep inner connection. At that moment, Shakuntala emerged from the hut. The spouses recognized each other instantly, and Dushyanta tearfully admitted his fault, explaining his earlier behavior as the result of the curse. The theme of loss and subsequent recovery of memory serves as a powerful metaphor for spiritual awakening in this story. A physical object, in this case the ring, acts as a trigger to restore lost truth and return a person to their duty. Forgetfulness symbolizes immersion in the routine of state affairs, where true bonds are overshadowed by external administrative responsibilities. Only direct contact with a tangible symbol from the past can break the dense veil of illusion and recall given promises. The reunited family returned to Hastinapura, where Bharata was officially recognized as the legitimate heir to the throne. Raised in harmony with nature and possessing an unyielding will, this boy would later become a great universal emperor. He united fragmented territories into a powerful kingdom known as Bharata Varsha. From him, the lunar dynasty line continued its rapid development, laying a firm foundation for future significant events that, over several generations, would completely transform the political map of the ancient world. As an adult, Bharata fulfilled the hopes placed in him, becoming a ruler whose name was forever etched in the geography and culture of the peninsula. He conducted numerous military campaigns, gradually annexing neighbouring principalities and establishing a unified legal code for all subjects. The united lands were called Bharata Varsha, meaning the domain of Bharata's descendants. His reign was notable for rejecting blind adherence to primogeniture. According to ancient texts, when it was time to pass the throne, Bharata carefully assessed the character of his 9 sons. Finding them unfit for supreme power due to their inclination toward idleness and lack of proper devotion, he declared, "The kingdom does not belong to the ruler, it belongs to the people, and the king is merely the guardian of the law." Without hesitation, the emperor disinherited his own children and adopted a worthy successor from the Brahmin caste, whom he trained in the art of war. In doing so, Bharata set a precedent for evaluating a ruler based on personal qualities and ability to uphold dharma, rather than birthright alone. From Bharata, the lunar dynasty line extended through centuries of peaceful development and local conflicts to King Kuru. This monarch became renowned not for military victories, but for spiritual achievements. He left the comfort of the palace and worked the barren plains for a long time, guiding a massive golden plough. The king of gods, Indra, descended from the heavens and asked about the purpose of his labour. "I prepare this land for those seeking liberation from the endless cycle of rebirth," Kuru replied, continuing to guide the oxen. Impressed by the monarch's perseverance, the gods named the place Kurukshetra, meaning field of Kuru. They promised that every warrior or ascetic who departed from this land would attain spiritual benefit. Later, Kuru's descendants founded a powerful kingdom with its political centre in Hastinapura. The capital rapidly expanded, fortified by stone walls, and grew to include vast marketplaces and magnificent palaces. It attracted the finest craftsmen, traders, and thinkers from across the continent, becoming a major stronghold of civilization. Over time, this lineage split into 2 rival branches due to a dynastic anomaly. The legitimate heir, Dhritarashtra, was born blind, so the throne, according to ancient laws, passed to his younger brother, Pandu. After Pandu's early death, the blind king assumed control of the state. In the palace of Hastinapura, two groups of cousins were raised together: the 5 sons of Pandu, known as the Pandavas, and 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, known in history as the Kauravas. The dispute over the right to inherit the throne gradually escalated from hidden childhood envy into an open political confrontation. The 100 sons of the elder brother, led by the ambitious eldest, were unwilling to share power. They orchestrated a deceitful game of dice, relying on the cunning of a close relative. This trickery resulted in the loss of the younger cousin's royal property and forced them into exile in the wild forests for 13 long years. Attempts to peacefully resolve the conflict upon their return failed. What began as a local quarrel over reclaimed territories soon grew into a vast conflict, drawing nearly all rulers of the ancient world into choosing sides in the impending bloodshed. This struggle became the inevitable climax of a centuries-old saga. On the battlefield, it was not just two armies clashing, but the accumulated karmic debts, unfulfilled promises, and hidden grievances of dozens of generations coming to a head. Analysing ancient texts reveals how the escalation of a family dispute into a global war illustrates a profound philosophical principle. Unresolved conflicts of ancestors weigh heavily on their descendants. This conflict did not arise in a single generation as a mere coincidence. It was the result of long-standing karmic accumulation within one great lineage. Curses from sages, secret alliances, broken vows, and constant power struggles stretching back to the earliest rulers layered upon one another. Selfish decisions of the past formed invisible cracks in the very foundation of the royal dynasty. By the time the younger cousins were born, these cracks had reached a critical point. The dynasty could no longer exist as it once had, burdened by the actions of fathers and grandfathers. A complete cleansing through the destruction of the old order was necessary to restore the lost balance. Mutual annihilation on the battlefield became the inevitable price for centuries of compromises with conscience, teaching future generations that the laws of the universe cannot be ignored indefinitely. The history of this lunar dynasty stands in stark contrast to the path of the solar line of rulers. While the descendants of the sun generally adhered to strict laws, maintaining state stability and unwavering principles of duty, the descendants of the moon constantly explored the grey areas of morality. They were drawn to complex questions of attachment, power, and personal freedom. Though not officially confirmed, many scholars of ancient texts believe this difference in temperament is directly linked to the nature of the celestial bodies themselves. The sun provides steady, constant light, symbolizing unshakable law, whereas the moon waxes and wanes, reflecting the variability of human nature. The path of the lunar kings is the path of a passionate, restless soul. These rulers regularly faced the consequences of their own desires. They made mistakes, lost thrones, suffered deep grief, and sometimes sank into despair. One gave up an empire for a heavenly nymph. Another lost his status due to pride, while a third sacrificed his own son's youth in an attempt to prolong earthly pleasures. Yet each found a way to undergo profound transformation and reach a new understanding of their role in the cosmos. This long chronicle leads us to an important philosophical conclusion. The main conflict always unfolds not between distant states, but within one's own family, and, consequently, within one's own mind. In the sacred teachings of that era, it is said that a person is shaped by their beliefs. As is their faith, so too are they. The descendants of the moon, with their doubts, hopes, and faith, forged the destiny of an entire continent. They were not flawless figures, but left behind a record of living people, in which every listener can recognize their own weaknesses and hidden strengths. With this, our exploration of the history of the lunar dynasty comes to a close. Thank you for your attention and for sharing this time together. Until we meet again. You've been watching Ancient Secrets. Thanks for watching and have a great day.